welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving deep into something pretty big, artificial intelligence and how it's impacting the world. You ready to cut through all the noise and figure out what really matters?
Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. So we found this really interesting opinion piece, and it's kind of pushing back against this whole idea that AI is, you know, like digital colonialism.
Oh, interesting.
Right. They even compare that idea to like saying a smartphone is basically the same as one of those old school ships from like the 1500s.
Wow. That's a pretty strong comparison.
I know, right? And get that they bring up this prediction from PwC that AI could add something like $15.7 trillion to the global economy by 2030.
Wow, that's a huge number.
It is. And almost half of that growth is supposed to be happening in emerging markets. But okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's break down the author's main point here. AI is not a new form of colonialism. But, I mean, we hear so much about big tech, right? Algorithms, all that. Does that make you kind of scratch your head like, wait, is that really true?
Yeah, I can see why people would think that way. I mean, it's definitely a valid concern, right? Like who actually controls AI? But I think the article makes a good point that just lumping AI together with colonialism really oversimplifies things. It misses some really important differences. Like, colonialism was all about physically dominating places. Taking land, taking resources, and often not always in the nicest ways.
And that's where they bring in that smartphone versus ship analogy, right?
Exactly. It shows how different those two things are. AI, it's about information. It's about processing power. And yeah, it has the potential to influence things for sure. But it's not about directly controlling, like, land or resources the way colonialism was.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So instead of looking at it like that, the author talks about places like India and Kenya and how they're using AI to make big leaps in healthcare and agriculture.
Right. And that's really important to see because it shows that this technology isn't just for wealthy countries, right? It's actually helping drive progress in places that maybe haven't benefited as much from past tech revolutions.
I like that. So the article goes even further and it kind of makes this bold statement. AI might actually be more like Robin Hood than, some evil empire. And they use Google's TensorFlow as an example of that.
Oh, yeah, TensorFlow. That's a really interesting one. So basically, it's this free toolkit that anyone can use to build AI. And it's open source, which means anyone can access it and use it. Think about it. A student in Mumbai or a small startup in Kenya, they have the same powerful tech at their fingertips as Google does.
So instead of like concentrating power in the hands of a few, it's actually spreading it around.
Potentially, yeah.
Which I guess goes back to that optimistic prediction about the global economy, right? But even though the author is pretty positive, they also say we should be careful about getting too, deterministic about it all.
Yeah, they warn against this idea that history basically dictates the future. Like, just because a country has had challenges in the past doesn't mean it can't become a leader in this new AI world.
And they use some pretty interesting examples to illustrate that. Like South Korea and Singapore, they both achieved incredible success, but not because their past, like, predetermined it. It was because of the choices they made, the strategies they followed.
Right, and that's really the takeaway for listeners. AI is powerful, but its impact isn't set in stone. Choices matter. Investments matter. Education matters.
I'm with you on that. And they had this really cool story about Rwanda using, get this, AI-powered drones to deliver medicine to places that are really hard to reach.
Yeah.
It's like they're skipping over those old infrastructure hurdles and finding totally new solutions.
Exactly. And it shows how adaptable AI is, right? How it can be tailored to very specific needs and challenges.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of challenges, one thing that always comes up with AI is, well, what about jobs? Are robots going to take over everything?
Yeah, that's a big one, and it's definitely something people are worried about. It's understandable. But, it's interesting to look back at history. Every time we've had these big technological jumps, yeah, there's been disruption, but new kinds of jobs have always emerged, too.
So like when we went from farming societies to like factory work and then to more service-based economies, each time there was anxiety, but it also created new opportunities.
Exactly. And we're already seeing that with AI. Like there are new jobs popping up in fields like data science, AI ethics, all sorts of stuff. The author even mentions AI helping artists and writers, which I think is really cool.
It's not just about replacing jobs then. It's about like expanding what we can do, maybe even opening up possibilities we haven't even imagined yet.
Exactly.
But okay, even with all this potential for good, there's still this question, right? Like, could AI actually make inequality worse? Is it just another way for those who already have power to like hold on to it even tighter.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid concern, and the article definitely talks about that. They actually compare AI to a Swiss Army knife.
Huh, a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah. It's a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad, depending on who's using it and what their intentions are.
So like it's not the knife's fault if someone uses it to, well,
Exactly. Blaming AI for inequality kind of misses the point. Like, the real problem is the choices we make as a society. How do we design policies? How do we educate people? How do we regulate technology? And how do we make sure the benefits of AI are shared fairly? Those are the things that will determine if AI leads to more equality or if it just makes things even more divided.
oh, that's interesting. And to prove their point, they bring up the example of those Nordic countries. They've managed to integrate automation without seeing a huge increase in inequality.
Yeah, that's a great example because it shows we're not just, powerless in the face of this technology. Our choices both as individuals and as a society, they really do shape how AI plays out.
So it sounds like the author is really trying to drive home the point that AI isn't inherently good or bad. It's a tool,
Mm.
and it all comes down to how we use it.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really important question for everyone listening. What kind of future do we want to build with AI? Because this isn't something that's just going to happen to us. We're actively creating this future with every choice we make.
I like that. It's kind of like that quote, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. But what does that actually look like with AI? Like, what are some real steps we can take to make sure it's a force for good?
Well, first of all, I think education is absolutely key. The more we all understand about AI, the better. How it works, the potential benefits, the potential downsides, the more informed our discussions will be and the better decisions we can make.
Yeah, knowledge is power.
Sure.
And speaking of power, the author also talks about how important it is to set some ethical guidelines and regulations for AI.
Absolutely. Things like protecting data privacy, making sure algorithms aren't biased. That's when they produce unfair results based on things like race or gender, and anticipating how AI will affect jobs.
Okay, so I know regulations don't always sound like the most fun thing in the world, but
But they're crucial, especially with something as powerful as AI. We need clear rules to make sure things are done ethically and that we're putting human well-being first.
like guardrails to keep things from going off track.
Exactly. And alongside regulations, we also need to make sure that the people who are actually developing AI come from a variety of backgrounds and have different perspectives.
Oh, that's a good point. If
Yeah.
we want AI to benefit everyone, it needs to be built by everyone, right?
Precisely. A more inclusive AI ecosystem will lead to fairer outcomes and hopefully prevent some of those unintended consequences that could end up harming certain groups.
So it sounds like we've got a lot to think about here. Education, ethical guidelines, smart regulations, and a more diverse group of people working on AI.
All of that is super important for making sure AI goes in the right direction.
But like our source emphasized, it really all comes down to the choices we make.
And those choices are shaped by our values, the conversations we have, the actions we take. It's a shared responsibility.
This whole conversation has really made me think about AI as kind of like a mirror. It reflects our own intentions and choices right back at us.
That's a really good way to put it. It shows that we're not just passive bystanders in all of this. We have a say in how AI is used, and we have a responsibility to use it for good.
And before we move on, I want to circle back to that analogy from earlier. Comparing AI to colonialism is like comparing a smartphone to a wooden ship.
Yeah, it's a good way to highlight how different these two historical forces really are.
But it also makes you think about how much things can change. Those ships, they crossed oceans and changed the world. AI has that same potential to completely reshape our lives. But like we've been talking about, the big difference is that AI isn't this like uncontrollable force. It's not like the weather or something.
Right, it's not inevitable.
We humans, we're the ones in control ultimately.
And that means we get to choose, right?
Yeah. Do we use it for good? Do we use if for bad? Does it bring us closer together or tear us further apart? I mean, does it bring out the best in us or the worst?
It's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, no kidding. But it's also pretty amazing. We actually have a chance to get this right, to learn from the mistakes we've made in the past and build a future with AI that works for everyone, not just, a select few.
A future where AI helps solve some of those big problems we're facing. Climate change, poverty, all those things.
I like the sound of that. So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave everyone with this question that really got me thinking. It's from the article we've been talking about. If AI is just a tool,
What kind of world do we want to build with it?
I think that's such a powerful question. It really makes you stop and think. The future of AI, it's not like already written for us.
Hmm.
We're the ones writing it right now with every decision we make.
With every line of code, every dollar we invest, every policy we put in place.
It's up to us to make sure it's a future where AI empowers people, not, takes advantage of them. A future where it helps us connect with each other, not just become even more divided. A future where it helps us all rise up, not get pushed down even further.
It might sound ambitious.
Yeah, maybe it is.
Yeah.
But it's definitely worth fighting for, right?
Right.
The stakes are pretty high here. We're not just talking about the future of technology. We're talking about the future of, well, humanity.
And that future ultimately is in our hands.
I love that. Okay, so to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of AI and its impact on, well, everything. We hope this conversation has given you some new ideas, maybe challenged some old ones, and hopefully inspired you to, do something no matter how big or small.
Because as we've been discussing, AI is just a tool. A
Yeah.
powerful tool, yeah, but still just a tool. It's what we do with it that matters.
Go out there and make the AI world you want to see. And until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.